Yeah, I read it. Hey, one question leaps out at me. What about the Emperor? Uh-huh. Doesn't mention him at all. No, not once. Yeah, that might be a big deal, yeah. All right. Okay. Bye. July 27th, 1945. Japan's armies are being defeated everywhere, and she hides what remains of her air force to prevent the planes from being destroyed on the ground. But this week at sea comes the final destruction of the Japanese Navy. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the United States successfully detonated an atomic bomb, causing an explosion the likes of which the world has never seen. Though the world at large didn't know about the detonation yet. U.S. President Harry Truman told British Prime Minister Winston Churchill about this atomic test at the Potsdam conference, which began last week, where Allied leaders have met to try to answer a few questions about how the post-war world might look. There was still active fighting, though, against Japanese forces in Burma, China, Borneo, and the Philippines, so it is not yet post-war at the moment. Though, of course, the war in Europe ended 2.5 months ago. But things aren't exactly settled there. On the 21st at Potsdam, Churchill tells Soviet leader Joseph Stalin he's not happy with the situation in Vienna and the rest of Austria, where the British haven't been allowed yet to take up their occupation zone. The country and the capital are divided into 4 zones for the British, French, Americans, and Soviets, just like Berlin and Germany have been. Stalin says that he just agreed to the recommendations by the European Advisory Commission just the other day, so the path is now free to fix a date for the Western Allies to enter their zones. And, so far as he was concerned, this could start at once. The discussion then turned to Poland. In a memorandum submitted to the conference, the Soviet delegation argued that Poland's western frontier should run to the west of Swinemünde as far as the river Oder, leaving the city of Stettin on the Polish side, then up the river Oder to the confluence with the western Neisse, and from there along its course to the northern border of Czechoslovakia. Truman says, hang on a second, moving the Polish border this far west is the same thing as giving the Poles their own occupation zone of Germany. He says Germany is supposed to be occupied the way they set it out at Yalta. Stalin says the Germans are all gone from the eastern parts that Poland intends to occupy, and the agreement to set up 4 zones of occupation is based on the 1937 borders. And this area is well inside those borders, and thus inside the Soviet zone of occupation. Stalin also tells the Allies there this week that the Japanese have sent out peace feelers, hoping to get the neutral USSR to mediate between them and the Allies. There are no definite proposals, though, and the Allies do not decide to follow things up, and Stalin reconfirms his intention stated many months ago of going to war with Japan in early August. Things, though, have changed since the Trinity test last week. Already the 21st, Truman and Churchill agree in principle that the bomb should be used to try to end the war with the Japanese as soon as possible. The news from Alamogordo had also changed the Americans' minds about the need for Russian help in winning the war against Japan. Although Stalin would have his own reasons for going ahead with the invasion of Manchuria, it was no longer a prime concern of the president's diplomacy as the conference settled into long wrangling sessions about German reparations and the control of Eastern Europe. The afternoon of the 24th, Truman hints at the weapon, telling Stalin's interpreter, "Will you tell the Generalissimo that we have perfected a very powerful explosive which we are going to use against the Japanese? And we think it will end the war." He does not mention that it's an atomic bomb, but he doesn't really need to, since Soviet intelligence knows about the Manhattan Project and what it's been working on, which is developing the bomb. For his part, Stalin is also less than forthright about the extent of those Japanese peace feelers trying to bring about a negotiated peace. Back on the 11th, Japanese ambassador to Moscow, now Take Sato, was instructed to sound out the intent to which it is possible to make use of Russia with regard to ending the war. Now, Japan's foreign minister, Shigenori Togo, does not think there's much chance at all of the Soviets supporting a peace treaty by negotiation, and neither does Sato. And guess what? Magic intelligence intercepts keep the Americans and British up to date with these Japanese hopes and plans, even while the Soviets continue stalling and stalling them. They also pick up some other interesting tidbits. Like on the 22nd, they pick up the prediction from Sato that the Americans will use B-29s to set the Japanese rice crop on fire as soon as the fields are drained for the harvest in November. He says that would cause a terrible famine and they'd be unable to continue the war. So he urges the cabinet to lay down arms now and end the war. Togo responds to him like this: even if war drags on and it becomes clear that it will entail much more bloodshed, if the enemy demands unconditional surrender, the whole country, as one man, will pit itself against him in accordance with the imperial will. Well, that is interesting, because on the 26th, the Potsdam Declaration is issued, which demands just that: the unconditional surrender of all Japanese military forces. It's issued by Churchill, President Truman, and Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek, and says Japan will face prompt and utter destruction if she does not comply. The Soviets are not at war with Japan, so they are not part of this. This is the declaration. 1. We, the President of the United States, the President of the National Government of the Republic of China, and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, representing the hundreds of millions of our countrymen, have conferred and agree that Japan shall be given an opportunity to end the war. 2. The prodigious land, sea, and air forces of the United States, the British Empire, and of China, many times reinforced by their armies and air fleets from the West, are poised to strike the final blows upon Japan. This military power is sustained and inspired by the determination of all the Allied nations to prosecute the war against Japan until she ceases to resist. 3. The result of the futile and senseless German resistance to the might of the aroused free peoples of the world stands forth in awful clarity as an example to the people of Japan. The might that now converges on Japan is immeasurably greater than that which, when applied to the resisting Nazis, necessarily laid waste to the lands, the industry, and the methods of life of the whole German people. The full application of our military power, backed by our resolve, will mean the inevitable and complete destruction of the Japanese armed forces, and just as inevitably, the utter devastation of the Japanese homeland. 4. The time has come for Japan to decide whether she will continue to be controlled by those self-willed militaristic advisors whose unintelligent calculations have brought the Empire of Japan to the threshold of annihilation, or whether she will follow the path of reason. 5. Following are our terms. We will not deviate from them. There are no alternatives. We shall brook no delay. 6. There must be eliminated for all time the authority and influence of those who have deceived and misled the people of Japan into embarking on world conquest. For we insist that a new order of peace, security, and justice will be impossible until irresponsible militarism is driven from the world. 7. Until such a new order is established, and until there is convincing proof that Japan's war-making power is destroyed, points in Japanese territory to be designated by the Allies shall be occupied to secure the achievement of the basic objectives we are here setting forth. 8. The terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out, and Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. 9. The Japanese military forces, after being completely disarmed, shall be permitted to return to their homes with the opportunity to lead peaceful and productive lives. 10. We do not intend that the Japanese shall be enslaved as a race or destroyed as a nation, but stern justice shall be meted out to all war criminals, including those who have visited cruelties upon our prisoners. The Japanese government shall remove all obstacles to the revival and strengthening of democratic tendencies among the Japanese people. Freedom of speech, of religion, and of thought, as well as respect for the fundamental human rights, shall be established. 11. Japan shall be permitted to maintain such industries as will sustain her economy and permit the exaction of just reparations in kind, but not those which would enable her to rearm for war. To this end, access to, as distinguished from control of, raw materials shall be permitted. Eventual Japanese participation in world trade relations shall be permitted. 12. The occupying forces of the Allies shall be withdrawn from Japan as soon as these objectives have been accomplished and there has been established, in accordance with the freely expressed will of the Japanese people, a peacefully inclined and responsible government. 13. We call upon the government of Japan to proclaim now the unconditional surrender of all Japanese armed forces and to provide proper and adequate assurances of their good faith in such action. The alternative for Japan is prompt and utter destruction. Prompt and utter destruction. Some might think that could be a reference to the atomic bombs the U.S. and the U.S. alone possesses, but I don't know. Why not come out and say it? Well, why not come out and say a bunch of things? For all that it outlines, there are still some pretty big gaps and generalizations. The emperor, for example, is not mentioned at all. And we've seen over the past months that the Allies have talked a lot about what to do or not to do with him. Is Emperor Hirohito one of those people who has deceived and misled the people of Japan into embarking on world conquest, whose authority and influence must be eliminated for all time? Or not? That's a pretty big one. What about Japan's smaller islands that are not specifically mentioned? Will they, after occupation, be part of Japan again or not? And to what extent will the Allies control Japan's raw materials? Or how about this one? Will there be a Japanese government under Allied occupation? Or will it be an Allied government running the whole show? So it is pretty vague despite the tone. Well, it's released to the press that evening and is soon enough broadcast in Japan in both English and Japanese. American planes dropped 3 million leaflets over Japan too, describing the declaration, although both picking up leaflets dropped by the enemy and listening to enemy broadcasts are illegal. The Allies do not, however, give the declaration to the Japanese government through diplomatic channels, since they do not want to be the ones seen to be suing for peace. The Japanese get it through Swiss intermediaries at 4:30 a.m. today, the 27th. Ambassador Sato calls it a big scare bomb. But the Japanese government does get very busy debating it and what to do about it. Prime Minister Kantaro Kangaroo Suzuki meets with Togo and the Chief Cabinet Secretary. Togo thinks it's vague about things that might personally concern a lot of the government, like who among them are going to be accused of being war criminals, and what will happen to them after that, and what and how will disarmament actually be. He meets with Hirohito after that, who says it's acceptable in general, but not to make any reply until they've heard back from the Soviets again about brokering a peace deal. There are further meetings, as you may imagine, and it transpires that the Japanese war minister and both Army and Navy chiefs of staff think such a surrender dishonorable and call for rejection. But Suzuki, Togo, and the Minister of the Navy are for accepting it once the emperor's status is made clear. So it's not clear just yet what the government's response is going to be. Suzuki's press conference is tomorrow. The Domei news agency, the government's official news service, releases a censored translation of the declaration to the Japanese public. This afternoon, they first report on the ultimatum. The report informed the Japanese public that, according to authoritative sources, the government would ignore the declaration and Japan will prosecute the war in Great East Asia until the bitter end. However, I can't say if this is accurate or not at this point. I mean, we'll really have to wait until Suzuki's press conference tomorrow, right? Exciting. However, there's also this. Truman this week finalizes the decision to use the atomic bombs on Japan if they do not very soon agree to terms. It is simply a question of quickly persuading the Japanese to surrender in order to save the many lives on both sides that would be lost if the Allies invaded the home islands. The Japanese are being bombed by the Americans this week, though. Well, and the British. The bombing of Kure begins the 24th. Attacks by the Americans and the British, the 24th, the 25th, and tomorrow, the 28th, sink most of the remaining warships the Japanese Navy has. Here's a little more detail. Kure, in Hiroshima Prefecture, is a major port, and it's been bombed several times the past few months, and B-29s have been on several mine-laying missions in the approaches to both Kure and Hiroshima. See, now in July, Japan's remaining warships are concentrated around here. Thing is, they don't have fuel, and they're basically just floating AA batteries. The attack has been ordered by Pacific Fleet Commander Chester Nimitz and is carried out by Bull Halsey's 3rd Fleet. Now, the fleet's fast carrier task force, Task Force 38, is under John McCain. And he is very much opposed to the attacks since he thinks the ships are a minimal threat. Halsey thinks it would be good for American morale in general, though, and would be a sort of reverse Pearl Harbor for people at home in the States to get behind. It would also prevent the Japanese from trying to use the fleet as a bargaining chip during surrender negotiations. Well, McCain's objection is noted, and the attacks go ahead. Now, the British fleet does operate as Task Force 37 as part of the U.S. 3rd Fleet, but they are excluded from this and are to attack the port and airfields of Osaka. It seems the Americans do not want the British to claim a part of destroying the Japanese fleet. On the 24th, American carrier planes fly 1,747 sorties, sinking the carrier Amagi and light cruiser Oyodo. They also damaged 3 battleships and 2 heavy cruisers pretty badly. The British sink 2 Type D Coastal Service escort carriers and ground the escort carrier Kaio, originally an ocean liner. Tomorrow is the last day of the attacks, and the Allies lose in total 133 planes and 102 people killed. The Japanese lose 306 planes destroyed and 392 damaged, and all told, 13 warships sunk, including 3 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, and a fleet carrier. Battleship Nagato at Yokosuka is the only operational capital ship the Japanese now have left. One bonus from this operation is that the Soviet Pacific Fleet can now operate in the Sea of Japan without fear of the Japanese Navy, which will be a big help if and when the Soviets declare war on Japan. But the Soviet fleet in this part of the world isn't very large. 2 cruisers, 10 destroyers, and a destroyer leader, 78 subs, which is a fair amount of subs, a few dozen minesweepers, 10 mine layers, around 200 motor torpedo boats, and other small ships. Project Hula has been going on for a while, though, which I talked about last week. It's the transfer of 180 American ships to the Soviets from frigate size on down. Things like LCILs, large infantry landing craft, to assist the Soviets in the near future. You know, there is naval surface action off Japan this week. The Battle of Sagami Bay. American Destroyer Squadron 61, 9 destroyers strong, engages a convoy of 2 Japanese freighters escorted by a sub-chaser and a minesweeper. They sink 1 freighter and damage the other one. It is possible that this is the last surface action of the war, considering the state of Japanese shipping. There is also action on land this week. In China, last week the Chinese took control of the road and rail from Hunan to Guangxi by taking points north of Guilin, even as their armies continued closing in on Guilin itself. The Japanese, of course, spend this week fighting back, and the fighting is bloody as they attempt to save communications to and from Guilin. However, they are finally routed by Chinese 26th Corps, and on the 27th, today, Chinese forces begin to enter Guilin even as they mop up the surroundings. And in the Philippines, on the 25th, organized Japanese resistance ends near Sarangani Bay on Mindanao. And that is the week. Lots of bombing of Japanese targets, and the decision coming to use the bomb on the Japanese if they don't accept this Potsdam Declaration and unconditional surrender, which we'll find out about next week. Poland being moved to the west. Oh, and one other thing. On the 26th, the results of the recent British elections are finally announced, and the Labour Party has won by a landslide. Clement Attlee replaces Winston Churchill as Prime Minister and immediately flies to Potsdam to join the conference. There is a recess in the conference while they wait for Attlee to arrive. But that day, the Potsdam Declaration is issued, still with Churchill's name on it. Much of the world is surprised by Churchill's defeat, what with his war record and all, but his Conservative Party, in the words of Donald Somerville, have failed to convince the electorate that they would be active and original enough to prevent any return to the conditions of the 1930s, when the Conservative governments did too little, it is felt, to mitigate the economic effects of the World Depression and failed to stand up to Hitler. In the war years, too, it has mostly been the labor politicians who have been responsible for the government departments charged with running the rationing system and organizing industry. And it is felt that they have done this in a way that has benefited the people in ways apart from helping the war effort. Yep, Winston Churchill is out as Prime Minister, and it will not be he that guides the British towards the end of World War II. That is pretty big news. Churchill was not, however, Prime Minister when the war began either. That was Neville Chamberlain, he of appeasement fame. If you want to see a Between Two Wars episode we did about that a few years ago, you can click here for some of 1938. And all of our productions are made thanks to the Time Ghost Army. These are the newest commissioned officers, and Edward Peck is this week's World War II Army Member of the Week. We also have an Army Member of the Week for Korea, which is another war I am currently covering. To help us continue to do all of this, join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.